Hello everyone! Now is the time after 6 episodes to change things around in this show. Many of you have been asking for a voiceover in these videos, and as you can hear, it's a thing now. However, the concept of the show is the same. I will showcase a style of rock and present the most emblematic bands of the genre. Just as a friendly reminder, in the first series of Lone Rock, we will only focus on British bands. Thank you for your time and have a good time watching this video. Progressive rock, also known as prog rock or prog, is no easy genre to describe. Prog rock appeared in the late 60s in the United Kingdom. It was an evolution of several other genres. It is a style based on technique and widely inspired by classical music symphonies. Indeed, movements, parts, changes in speed and rhythm, and changes of atmosphere in common in long prog segments. Hence the nickname symphonic rock. The most notable representatives of this genre in the United Kingdom are Pink Floyd, King Crimson, Genesis, Yes, Supertramp, Jethro Tull, and the guitarist Michael Field. In Germany, there is a subgenre of prog rock which contributed to create electronic music, the krautrock. Prog rock also has an undeniable impact on the ambient genre, but we're gonna get to that in an upcoming edition of Composer. In France, the Tull, which is the local branch of prog rock, is being developed by some bands such as Magma. It will take a certain time before prog reaches the United States, with neo-progressive and progressive metal in the 80s. Currently, the last representatives of progressive rock express themselves during its third phase, which is the new prog. New prog is something to be found in the work of several very talented musicians, such as those performing with Muse and Anathema, while actually we'll only focus on very talented musicians since nearly all progressive rockers are insanely talented. One of the features of prog rock are the composition of concept albums, which their songs all revolve around a single theme. In addition to that, most progressive rock albums can be listened to in one go, as if the whole album was a single song. I already mentioned it really quickly, but you have to know that most prog songs are pretty long, and often divided in several parts. For instance, Michael Field's Tubullar is an album containing nothing but 2 songs, part 1 and part 2, each one during 25 and 23 minutes respectively. Similarly, Wish You Were Here, a Pink Floyd album, contains 2 parts for the track Shine On You Crazy Diamond, resulting in a 25-minute long song. Echoes, another song of the band, is also notably long. By the way, this is an actual issue for me and my show since I can't show a whole entire track here for it's too long. Dividing it will take away most of its progressive appeal. Well, you probably figured it out by now, prog rock is not something to treat lightly. Later on, will emerge a complete opposite of prog rock, punk rock, where musicians are not necessarily talented and which the songs rarely last more than 3 minutes. By the way, I look forward to showcase this genre. But right now, let's go to know progressive rock along with the major bands that marked its history. I've already mentioned Pink Floyd in my video about psychedelic rock, a video which I suggest you to see if you haven't already. Well, it's kind of delicate note to take about Pink Floyd insofar as we are talking about prog, but keep in mind that all bands can actually be classified in a variety of genres. Michael Field's career begins in 1968 at the age of 15, at a time where he was playing in several bands as guitar or bass player, but his first album dates from 1973 and is called Tubular Bells. Tubular Bells is the result of composition which the young Mike was working on since 1971. His progressive symphonic and instrumental rock album contains the eponymous song, divided in 2 parts. Tubular Bells has since become a reference in the entire world. Everyone recognizes the bell sound used by Michael Field on this album. The beginning of this song will be used in the iconic movie The Exorcist, only a few months after the release of his first album. The world-famous guitar player has produced 25 albums in total, during its 48 years of career. He continued to play as a progressive rocker, though he included pop-rock songs in some of his albums, most notably Moonlight Shadow, To Friends, and Family Man, sung by Maggie Reilly. Indeed, Michael Field had a few very good singers as co-workers, for instance Roger Chapman singing Shadow on the Wall. Michael Field released several sequels of his first album, Tubullar Bells 2 in 1992 and Tubullar Bells 3 in 1998. He also produced an orchestral version of his album back in 1975. In 2003, he decided to record his album a second time. After all these years he realized he had done several mistakes such as tempo and wished to create a better updated version. However, there is one interesting difference between the 1973 version and the 2003 version. In the new version, Michael Field divided the previous two parts into a total of 17 tracks. This way, you can actually discover the titles he had found for his sub-compositions, titles such as fast guitars, basses, main of tune, jazz. All of the titles are a description of the different techniques used on each track. Anyhow, I strongly recommend listening to the discography of this music genius. Genesis is a band formed back in 1967. The singer Peter Gabriel stated that the band was willing to get rid of the musical forms in place at time. The result of this is a style that's close to progressive rock, which is a style that's pretty unregulated, as I said already. The band gets famous with its fourth lineup, composed by lead singer Peter Gabriel, keyboardist Tony Banks, guitarist Steve Hackett, bassist Mike Rutherford, and drummer Phil Collins. In 1974, this formation is at the top of its glory with the concept album The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. 1 year later, Peter Gabriel leaves Genesis. The drummer of the band, Phil Collins, replaces him as singer. In 1976, the band releases 2 more albums before eventually splitting with their guitar player. Since then, Mike Rutherford will take care of both the guitar and the bass. In tour, the band is formed of the 3 main members as well as a second drummer, Chester Thompson, and another musician able to play both the bass and the guitar, Daryl Strummer. The 3 band members released 2 prog albums, notably And They Were Free, referring to the trio still playing under the name Genesis. In 1980 is released the first album marking Genesis' new era, a pop-rock period for the band. His pop-rock hits are known as Turn It On Again and Misunderstanding for their 10th album, Duke. The next albums, Abacab and Genesis, contain the other massively successful hits, Abacab, Mama, Home by the Sea and That's All. In 1986, their 13th album, Invisible Touch, brings new hits including Land of Confusion, Throwing It All Away, and the eponymous song. The band also goes back to composing more progressive rock style songs, the best examples being The Brazilian and Domino. We Can Dance, released in 1991, is one of the biggest successes of the band, especially with I Can Dance, criticizing techno music, or Jesus He Knows Me, criticizing televangelism. This song result is an album that's particularly engaged. I could also mention the song No Zone of Mine, dealing with domestic abuse. Since 1981, Phil Collins has had a solo career in parallel with his work as a part of Genesis. However, he was willing to focus on it, so he left the band. The pinnacle of his popularity is dated to the 90s, as a time when he composed lots of soundtracks such as Tarzan's. In 1999, Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford put an end to the band after an album with a brand new singer, Way Wilson, Calling All Stations. The band is now famous on a worldwide scale and has since reformed on some occasions with his 80s lineup, for example in 2007 with a world tour. Each band member who started a solo career actually did very well on their own. Peter Gabriel signed hits such as Solsburry Hill and Sledgehammer. Mike Rutherford signed with the band Mike Plus the Mechanics with the hit Over My Shoulder. Lastly, Steve Hackett also had a huge solo career, and there's Phil Collins, which we'll talk about again soon. Formed in 1968, Yes is one of the main British progressive rock bands. After a whole decade and 10 albums, starting with Years in 1969 until Drama in 1980, the band splits up. Honor of a Lonely Heart, a global success, marks their return in 1983 with a specific style alternating between prog and pop rock. Yes will have a constant success in the 19s with 6 albums during this time period. However, only a single album will be published in the beginning of the 21st century, Magnification, after which the band eventually split again. 2008 marks another comeback and the return of Yes with the album Fly From Here, as well as another album in 2014, Heaven and Earth. There is still much to learn for me regarding some of these bands, so I won't be able to describe them in detail, but there are still a lot of things for us to see ahead. The progressive rock band Jethro Tull was formed in 1967 and mixed different sonorities, varying from folk rock, blues rock, and even hard rock. The band stopped in 2011 after a total of 21 albums and 44 years career. Formed in 1967, King Crimson became famous with its concept album In the Court of the Crimson King in 1969. Becoming a reference in prog, the band composes jazz rock and heavy metal inspired albums from 1973. The band separates after 7 albums before coming back with a different lineup and an also different style. Always focused on progressive rock, King Crimson is however influenced by new wave of rock and plays more experimental rock tracks on the 3 albums of the second era of the band, that separates again in 1984. It's back in the 90s with Fra. In 1995 is greatly inspired by Dream Theater's progressive metal, band itself inspired by King Crimson that played a prog tainted of heavy metal in the 70s. A proto-progressive metal some way. Well, if you aren't accustomed to hear proto and post, here are some explanations. When a style starts being played, people give it a name. Let's take punk rock as an example. In the 70s, it's the advent of this style. Retrospectively, 60s garage rock, which led to the creation of punk rock, has been called proto-punk rock or proto-punk. In the 80s, punk rock influenced bands have been called post-punk rock or post-punk. All of it to say that King Crimson's prog in the 70s was a kind of proto-progressive metal. And you have people that will say, no, you just have to call it rock, metal or punk. Well, no. You're on Lone Rock channel, my channel, and I'm here to learn you hundreds of rock styles we can define. Capito? If you have questions, don't hesitate to write it in the comments. Well, we talk about King Crimson. The band continued performing its prog before separating in 2009 after an album in 2003, The Power to Believe. The band reformed in 2014 for shows. Maybe will the band release an album soon, who knows? Supertramp is a prog band formed in 1969 by multi-instrumentalist Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson. Jazz rock and art rock inspired, the band produced lots of concept albums in the 70s with albums like Breakfast in America in 1979. Its many successes are songs like School, Bloody Well Right, Dreamer, Ready, Give a Little Bit, The Logical Song, Goodbye Stranger, and of course Breakfast in America in the 70s, and It's Raining Again in the 80s. The band separates in 1988 with the departure of one of its creators in 1983, Roger Hodgson. Supertramp reformed in 1995 and produces 2 albums, Some Things Never Change in 1997 and Slow Motions in 2002 before they stopped the same year. Supertramp has been on tour in 2010 for the 40 years of the band and did some shows in 2019. The band is still a reference and I don't know many people that don't appreciate Supertramp. Alan Parsons is a gifted sound engineer. He worked with the Beatles on Abbey Road and Let It Be albums, and then with Pink Floyd on Dark Side of the Moon in 1973. He decided in 1975 to create its own band, the Alan Parsons Project, with keyboardist and singer Eric Woolfson. But you have to understand that if we talk about Parsons, it's that he played progressive rock. The band begins also in 1976 with Tales of Mystery and Imagination, and ends in 1990 with the final album, Gaudi. The Alan Parsons Project, it's 10 sometimes instrumental albums, sometimes with a lyric sing. Its more famous instrumental songs are I, Robot, Mama Gamma and Oki. And this concludes this long episode about progressive rock. If you like the new format of the emission, say it in the comments. Share the video with your friends and subscribe not to miss Wednesday's video, a back-on episode.